The castle had been burning for 3 days, and Dahlia Sinclair hadn't realized it was meant for her. She'd seen the photographs online when she applied for the position stone corridors, arched windows, turrets that clawed at low clouds, but no mention of light. The listing had been clinical: archivist needed, live in position, private collection spanning 4 centuries, room and board provided, remote location, serious inquiries only. Dahlia had been serious. She had 3 degrees in historical preservation, student loans that made her nauseous, and exactly $14 in her checking account when she hit send on her application. The response had come within an hour. A single line, typed in a font that looked like it belonged on parchment. You are invited to begin immediately. No interview, no references checked, just a car sent to her apartment the next morning, sleek and black, the driver silent behind tinted glass. Dahlia had thrown her life into 2 suitcases and climbed in, too desperate to question good fortune. Now, standing at the base of the castle as dusk bled into the horizon, she understood why no one else had taken the job. The castle was alive with light, every window blazed. Flames danced behind glass in patterns too numerous to count, golden and warm against the gathering dark. Lanterns hung from iron hooks along the outer walls, swaying in the wind. The massive oak doors stood open, and beyond them stretched a corridor so bright it looked like noon trapped in stone. Dahlia's hands shook as she gripped her suitcase handles. The driver had already disappeared, the car a memory of red taillights vanishing down the mountain road. She was alone. She was always alone, and that was fine. That was survivable. But the sun was setting, and she needed to get inside before Miss Sinclair. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, soft as settled dust. Dahlia spun, her heart a fist against her ribs, and found him standing in the doorway. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever been afraid of. White hair fell to his shoulders, catching the light like spider silk. His skin was pale enough to see the faint tracery of veins at his temples, his throat. He wore black, simple and well cut, and he stood with the stillness of something that had forgotten how to fidget. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, dark as winter nights, ancient and careful, fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel catalogued. "I am Yaroslav Penhallow," he said, and his accent was old, the consonants shaped by a tongue that had learned English when it was still something else. "You are welcome here." Dahlia's mouth was dry. She managed a nod, managed to walk forward, even though every instinct screamed that she was prey moving toward a predator. She climbed the steps. He didn't move back to let her pass, and for one breathless moment she stood close enough to realize he cast no shadow in all that light, close enough to see that he didn't blink. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the opportunity." Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or pain. He stepped aside with a grace that was too fluid, too controlled. "Come." The castle interior was a cathedral of flame. Candles lined every surface, thick pillars of wax that dripped onto silver trays. Lanterns hung from chains, their glass panels etched with patterns that threw dancing shadows. Sconces marched along the walls at intervals so close their light overlapped, erasing every pocket of darkness. The air smelled of smoke and old stone and something sweeter, like roses left too long in a vase. Dahlia walked as if through a dream. Her fear, the cold, familiar weight that lived beneath her breastbone, had gone quiet. The dark couldn't touch her here. For the first time since she was 7 years old, since the night the power went out and the closet door locked and her parents didn't come for 3 hours, she felt something close to safe. "You lit all of this," she said, and it wasn't a question. Yaroslav walked ahead of her, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't look at her when he answered. "I was informed of your requirements." "My requirements?" "You wrote in your application that you would need accommodations. That darkness was not acceptable." Dahlia's face burned. She had written that in a moment of desperate honesty she'd regretted the instant she hit send. She'd been certain it would disqualify her. What archival collection wanted someone who needed every light on, who couldn't work in dimmed preservation conditions, who was broken in such a fundamental and inconvenient way? "I didn't think you'd. This must have taken days." 3, Yaroslav said softly. He paused at a branching corridor, gestured left. "Your quarters are this way. I hope they will suffice." Her room was a tower chamber, circular and high-ceilinged, with windows on 3 sides and a bed that could have slept 4. But what stole her voice were the candles. Hundreds of them, in iron stands and glass votives and elaborate candelabras, arranged in clusters that turned the space into a garden of light. A writing desk sat beneath the eastern window, its surface clear except for a single lamp with a shade of amber glass. The adjoining bathroom, she could see it through an open door, glowed softly, lit by what looked like fairy lights strung along the mirror. "If you need anything," Yaroslav said from the doorway, "pull the cord by the bed. I will hear." Dahlia set down her suitcases and turned to thank him, to ask him how he'd known, why he'd gone to such impossible lengths for a stranger. But he was already gone, the corridor empty except for the patient flames. She didn't sleep that first night. She lay in the enormous bed, fully clothed, and watched the candles burn, watched the way the light moved on the stone ceiling, liquid and alive. She thought about the man who had done this, Yaroslav Penhallow. The name sounded like something from a fairy tale, the kind where the castle was cursed and the prince was really a monster. But monsters didn't light 10,000 candles for broken girls who were afraid of the dark, did they? When dawn came, gray and thin through the windows, Dahlia finally closed her eyes. She slept through the morning and woke to find every candle replaced, the burned-down stubs gone, fresh wax standing sentinel. She hadn't heard anyone enter, hadn't heard anything at all. The archives were in the castle's lowest level, reached by a spiral stair that descended through stone, so old it had gone smooth underfoot. Dahlia went down at noon, after forcing herself to eat something from the kitchens, a vast space lined with modern appliances that looked surreal against the medieval architecture, everything spotless and untouched. She'd found bread, cheese, fruit that was perfectly ripe, no sign of who maintained it all. The archives blazed like the rest of the castle, work lamps on tripods, overhead fixtures, more candles. Dahlia stood at the entrance and felt tears prick her eyes. She'd worked in a dozen collections, always fighting with curators about her need for light, always making do with inadequate compromises. This was a gift. This was impossible. The collection itself was staggering. Manuscripts in glass cases, their pages illuminated with gold leaf and pigments that still gleamed. Books bound in leather and wood and materials she couldn't identify, stacked on shelves that reached the ceiling. Maps, correspondence, ledgers, and at the center, a work table with gloves and tools already laid out, waiting. Dahlia lost herself in it. Hours disappeared into careful cataloging, into the detective work of dating and authentication. She forgot to be afraid. She forgot to wonder about her employer, about the castle, about anything except the beautiful, fragile things in her hands. "You did not eat dinner." She jumped, nearly dropped the 15th century psalter she'd been examining. Yaroslav stood at the base of the stairs holding a tray. He moved like water, like something that had never been clumsy. "I lost track of time," Dahlia said, peeling off her archival gloves. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You don't have to bring me food. It is no burden." He set the tray on a clear space at the work table. Soup, bread, wine in a glass that caught the light like a jewel. He didn't sit, didn't come closer, just stood at a careful distance, his hands loose at his sides, his dark eyes watching her with that same unsettling intensity. "This collection is extraordinary," Dahlia said, desperate to fill the silence. "Some of these pieces should be in museums. The psalter alone is worth I can't even estimate. Where did you acquire all of this?" "I've been gathering it for a long time." "Your family, you mean?" A pause. "Yes, my family." Dahlia picked up the soup spoon, more to have something to do than from hunger. The soup was rich and perfectly seasoned, and she wondered again about the invisible staff. "Do you live here alone?" "Now I do not." It should have sounded warm. It should have sounded welcoming. But there was something in his voice, some hollow note that made Dahlia look up. Yaroslav was watching her eat with an expression she couldn't name. Hunger, maybe. Longing. He looked like a man at a window, staring in at something he couldn't reach. "Are you all right?" she asked. He blinked, and the expression vanished, replaced by careful blankness. "I am well. I will leave you to your work." "Wait." Dahlia stood, the chair scraping stone. "I wanted to thank you for the lights. I know it must be expensive and strange, and I can't explain why I need them, but you didn't ask, you just—" Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard. "No one's ever done something like that for me. So thank you." Yaroslav stood very still. In the lamplight, his skin was luminous, unreal. "You're not strange," he said quietly. "You are afraid. That's different. Most people don't see the difference. Most people are not paying attention." He left before she could respond, ascending the stairs with that inhuman grace. Dahlia sat back down, her soup cooling, and tried to shake the feeling that she'd just been seen in a way she'd spent years avoiding. The days fell into rhythm. Dahlia worked in the archives, surfacing only for food and restless sleep. The collection was larger than she'd thought, organized according to a logic she was still deciphering. There were texts in languages she didn't recognize, illuminated manuscripts that depicted creatures from nightmares, a bestiary that showed men with wings and fangs, a ledger written in what looked like blood, listing names and dates going back 500 years. Yaroslav appeared every evening with food. He never stayed long, never asked about her progress. Sometimes she'd look up from her work and find him standing in the doorway, watching with that hungry, careful expression, and the moment she met his eyes, he'd vanish as if he'd never been there at all. She wanted to ask him questions, wanted to know why a man who owned a castle and a priceless collection lived like a ghost in his own home. But he was so self-contained, so remote, that Dahlia couldn't find the words. Instead, she left notes on the tray when he came to collect it, small observations about what she'd found. The Psalter was French, circa 1450. The bestiary was incomplete, missing at least 3 folios. Had he noticed the damage to the binding on the herbal? He never wrote back. But the next morning, she'd find things rearranged according to her suggestions, problems fixed, materials she needed waiting on the work table. They were having a conversation in silence, she realized, in the movement of objects and the lighting of candles and the careful distance he maintained. She wondered if he was lonely. She wondered if that was why he'd hired her, why he'd lit the castle like a bonfire. She wondered why he never came out during the day. It was the smallest things that gave him away. The way he never ate or drank in front of her. The way his skin stayed corpse pale no matter how much light surrounded him. The way he moved, too fast and too smooth, like gravity was a suggestion. The way he looked at her throat when she spoke, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. Dahlia knew what he was before she admitted it to herself. She'd cataloged enough medieval texts, read enough marginalia and folklore. Vampires weren't supposed to be real, but then again, castles weren't supposed to burn with 10,000 lights for one girl's terror. She should have been afraid. She should have run. But when she thought about Yaroslav standing in the doorway with his hungry, careful eyes, all she felt was a strange, aching pity. He'd lit his home on fire for her. He'd driven back the dark, and darkness was what his kind lived in. Dahlia found him on the 18th night, in the west wing where she'd been forbidden to go. It wasn't forbidden explicitly. He'd never said she couldn't explore. But the west wing was the only part of the castle that stayed dark, its corridor unlit except for the faint spill of illumination from the rest of the building. She'd avoided it instinctively, her old fear rising. But tonight, restless and sleepless, she'd followed the darkness like a thread. The corridor was long and cold. Her footsteps echoed. She'd brought a flashlight from her room, and its beam cut through the black like an accusation. At the end of the hall, she found a door, heavy oak banded with iron, and when she pushed it open, she found Yaroslav. He sat in a chair by a dead fireplace, his white hair stark against the shadows. The room was empty of everything except that chair and the darkness pressing in from all sides. No candles, no lamps. Just him, alone, his eyes closed. "You should not be here," he said without opening his eyes. Dahlia's hand tightened on the flashlight. "You sit in the dark." "Yes? Every night?" "Yes." She stepped into the room, and he flinched as if the flashlight beam burned. "Why?" "You know why." His voice was flat, drained. "You have been in the archives. You have seen the texts. You are not foolish. You're a vampire." Yes, Dahlia should have run. Her fear should have swallowed her whole, but instead, she lowered the flashlight and asked the only question that mattered. "Does the light hurt you?" Yaroslav opened his eyes. In the darkness, they gleamed faintly, like an animal's. Yes. How badly? It does not matter. Yes, it does. She moved closer, her heart hammering. You lit the entire castle for me. You sit in the dark so I don't have to. You're hurting yourself because I'm broken. You are not broken. He stood in one fluid motion, and suddenly he was too close, his face bare and fierce. You are afraid, and you have reason to be afraid, and I will not have you diminished by something I can bear. The light pains me. Your fear pains me more. Do you understand? Dahlia stared at him. At this impossible man, this impossible creature who spoke like pain, was a currency he could spend on her behalf. How long have you been sitting here? Since you arrived. Every night? Every night. Yaroslav. I do not want your guilt. His voice was rough, almost angry. I want your peace. That is all. That is everything. He left her standing there, striding past her and out into the corridor, disappearing into the lit sections of the castle where he must walk through agony with every step. Dahlia sank into the chair he'd vacated, her legs unsteady. The darkness pressed close, familiar and terrible, but for the first time in her life, it felt like someone else's pain mattered more than her fear. She couldn't let him suffer for her. She couldn't. But the thought of asking him to extinguish the lights, of being plunged back into the dark, made her chest tighten until she couldn't breathe. Dahlia had been 7 when it happened. A game of hide-and-seek at a family friend's house, a closet that seemed perfect, a door that locked from the outside when it swung shut. She'd been confident at first. Someone would find her soon. But minutes stretched into hours, and the darkness in that closet had been absolute. No crack of light under the door, no sound, just black emptiness in her own ragged breathing and the growing certainty that she'd been forgotten, that she'd die there, that no one was coming. When her parents finally found her, she'd stopped screaming. She'd gone silent and small, curled in the corner, her mind somewhere far away where the dark couldn't reach. The therapists called it trauma. They gave her coping mechanisms and exposure therapy and told her she'd outgrow it. She never did. The fear lived in her bones now, primal and permanent. She'd organized her entire life around avoiding darkness. Night shifts, bright apartments, strings of backup flashlights. She'd lost friends who didn't understand why she couldn't go to dimly lit restaurants or movie theaters. She'd never been camping, never seen the stars properly. She'd made herself small and manageable and alone. And then Yaroslav had looked at her requirements and set his home ablaze. Dahlia sat in his dark room and cried. For the girl in the closet, for the man sitting in pain every night, for the impossible situation they were trapped in, 2 people trying not to hurt each other and failing. She didn't know how long she stayed there, but when she finally stood and walked back to her bright tower room, she found Yaroslav waiting in the corridor outside her door. He stood with his back to the wall, his face drawn, his hands shaking faintly. I'm sorry, he said. I should not have spoken harshly. You owe me nothing. The lights are yours as long as you want them. You're in pain right now, Dahlia said, standing here. You're in pain. He didn't deny it. Come inside. She opened her door and the warm glow of candles spilled out. Please. That will not help. I know, but I can't. I need to understand. Will you tell me? How bad is it? Yaroslav hesitated, then followed her into the room. He moved to the darkest corner, where the candle's reach was weakest, and stayed standing. It is like standing too close to a fire, a low burn, constant, bearable. For how long? I am very old, Miss Sinclair. I have borne worse. That's not an answer. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his composure cracked. I do not know. Months, perhaps less. But you will finish your work by then, and you will leave, and I will return to the dark. And if I don't finish? If the collection takes years? Then it takes years. You'll burn yourself for years so I can sleep at night? Yes. The word was simple, absolute. Dahlia felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked away since the closet. This impossible creature, this vampire king in his castle, had decided her comfort was worth his suffering. It was the most selfless and most devastating thing anyone had ever done for her. Why? She whispered. Yaroslav turned away, but not before she saw the naked longing in his face. Because when I learned that you were coming, I read everything you had written. Your publications, your thesis, the letters of recommendation from your professors. I read about your mind, and your dedication, and your brilliance. And then I read the single line about the lights, and I knew that you had been hurt, and He stopped, started again. I have been alone for a very long time, Miss Sinclair. When I lit the candles, I was not thinking of myself. I was thinking that perhaps if you were not afraid, you might stay. The silence stretched between them, fragile and immense. My name is Dahlia, she said finally. If I'm going to stay, you should use it. He turned back to her, and the hope in his eyes was almost too much to bear. Dahlia. It sounded like a prayer the way he said it, like something holy. They stood there in the candlelight, a vampire and a girl who was afraid of the dark, and Dahlia thought, I am going to fall in love with him. I am going to fall in love with him, and it is going to be impossible and terrible, and I'm going to do it anyway. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt inevitable. Over the following weeks, things shifted. Yaroslav still brought her dinner every evening, but now he stayed. They talked about the collection, about the histories locked in those ancient pages. He told her about the acquisition of certain pieces, how he'd traveled to Venice in 1623 to buy the bestiary, how the Psalter had belonged to a monastery dissolved under Henry VIII. His stories were matter of fact, delivered without drama, and it took Dahlia days to fully register that he was describing his own memories. He had lived through the things she studied. He was history, walking and talking and sitting across from her with that careful distance. She asked him about his kind, and he answered with the same quiet honesty. Yes, he drank blood. No, he could not go into sunlight. It would kill him within minutes. He was over 600 years old, turned during a war he would not name. He had been king of his kind in this region for 3 centuries, though he no longer kept court. Why not? Dahlia asked. I grew tired, Yaroslav said simply, of politics, of the games. I wanted peace. Is that why you're alone? Yes. But Dahlia was beginning to suspect there was more to it, the way he spoke about other vampires with a distance that suggested estrangement, the way he'd isolated himself in this castle, building a haven that was antithetical to his nature. He'd been preparing for something, or someone. She started sleeping less, not from fear, but from wanting more time with him. She'd find excuses to leave the archives early, to wander the lit corridors until she heard his footsteps. They'd talk for hours, about everything and nothing. He asked about her life, and she told him about graduate school, about the loneliness of being the girl who couldn't turn off the lights. He listened like every word mattered, like she mattered. Do you miss it? She asked one night. They were in the library, another vast room, shelves groaning under leather spines, a fire crackling in the hearth that he stayed far from. The dark, I mean, the way it should be for you. Yaroslav was silent for a long time. Sometimes. It is restful, the dark. The light is noise. But I do not miss it enough to want it back. Not if it means, he stopped. Not if it means I'm afraid? Yes. Dahlia set down the book she'd been holding. I'm working on it. The fear, I mean. I go to the corridor outside the West Wing sometimes. I stand there for a few minutes. I'm trying to build up tolerance. His head snapped up. You do not have to. I know, but you're sitting in pain for me every night. The least I can do is try. Dahlia. He crossed the room in 3 strides, fast enough that she gasped. He stopped just short of touching her, his hands hovering near her shoulders. I do not want you to fight your fear for my sake. I want you to fight it because you choose to, because you are ready, not because you feel you owe me. She looked up at him, at his fierce, beautiful face, and felt her heart lurch. What if it's both? Then I will sit in the dark and be grateful that you exist. They were too close. Dahlia could feel the cold radiating off him, could see the faint inhuman gleam in his eyes. He was a predator, a creature of nightmare, and she wanted to close the distance between them so badly it hurt. But Yaroslav stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. It is late. You should rest. Are you going to the West Wing? Yes. Will you? She stopped, unsure how to ask. Will you stay here instead, just for tonight? Something like pain crossed his face. Dahlia, I should not be near you when the candles burn low. It is not safe. I trust you. You should not. But I do. He closed his eyes, and she watched him war with himself. Finally he nodded once, sharp and reluctant. "I will stay, but I will sit far from you." "Okay." He took a chair on the far side of the room, half hidden in shadow, and Dahlia curled up on the sofa near the fire. She didn't mean to fall asleep, but the warmth in his presence pulled her under. When she woke near dawn, she found a blanket tucked around her and Yaroslav gone. But on the table beside the sofa, he'd left a single white rose. Spring was coming to the mountains. Dahlia could see it from her tower windows, green creeping up the slopes, the snow retreating. She'd been at the castle for 2 months, and the cataloging was less than half finished. She told herself she was being thorough. She told herself the collection deserved attention to detail. She didn't tell herself the truth, that she was stalling because leaving meant never seeing Yaroslav again. They'd fallen into something that wasn't quite courtship, but felt dangerously close. He brought her flowers from the castle's greenhouse, carefully chosen blooms that she'd find on her work table. She left him books from the archives, annotations in the margins pointing out passages she thought he'd love. They were dancing around each other, two people terrified to name what was growing between them. Dahlia knew it was impossible. She was human. He was immortal. She'd grow old and die while he stayed frozen, perfect, untouchable. But late at night, wrapped in blankets and candlelight, she let herself imagine it anyway. Imagined what it would be like to stay. To learn to love the dark because he was in it with her. To build a life in this impossible place. She was standing in the corridor outside the West Wing, flashlight in hand, trying to make herself turn it off for just 30 seconds, when she heard voices. Not Yaroslav's voice. These were different, cold and sharp, echoing up from somewhere below. Dahlia moved toward the sound, her fear momentarily forgotten, and found a staircase she'd never noticed before. It spiraled down into the castle's depths, unlit and narrow. She hesitated at the top, but the voices were rising, angry, and she heard Yaroslav's name. She descended in darkness, her flashlight beam bouncing off stone. The voices grew louder. At the bottom, she found a corridor lined with iron door cells, she realized. Dungeons. And at the end, a room with light spilling out, harsh and white, so different from the warm glow of the castle above. Dahlia reached the doorway and stopped. Yaroslav stood in the center of the room, surrounded by 4 others. They were like him, white-haired, pale-skinned, inhumanly beautiful. But where he was composed, they were fury. A woman with a face like a blade was speaking, her voice cutting. "Humiliation to our kind. You sit in light like a dog begging for scraps from a human. The court is laughing at you, Yaroslav, at us." "The court may laugh as it wishes, Seraphine." Yaroslav's voice was level, but there was steel beneath it. "I am not beholden to its opinions. You are a king. You are beholden to your bloodline, to the dignity of what we are. And instead, you burn your home for a mortal who will be dead in a blink. That is enough." The air went cold, frost spreading on the walls. Yaroslav hadn't moved, but the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. "You will not speak of her." A man stepped forward, younger looking, with a sneer that showed fangs. "We could simply remove the problem, drain the girl. You'd return to yourself within a week." Yaroslav moved so fast Dahlia didn't see it. One moment he was in the center of the room, the next he had the man by the throat, lifted off the ground, his eyes blazing with something ancient and terrible. "Touch her, and I will end you slowly." "You prove our point," Seraphine said coldly. "You are compromised, weakened. We came to offer you a choice. Send the human away and reclaim your throne properly, or we will take action ourselves." "What action?" "The castle burns with lights. Lights can be extinguished." Yaroslav set the man down and turned to face Seraphine. When he spoke, his voice was soft, and that made it more frightening. "You will not touch the lights. You will not touch her. You will leave my home and not return, and if you defy me, I will remind you why I have been king for 3 centuries. "You cannot fight all of us," Seraphine said, "not when you weaken yourself with this display. The court is restless, Yaroslav. They see you diminished. If you will not defend your own dignity, others will rise to take your place. Let them rise. You would give up everything for her?" "Yes." The word hung in the air, simple and devastating. Dahlia's breath caught. She should announce herself. She should walk in and end this. But she was frozen, listening to Yaroslav defend her against his own kind, understanding for the first time the cost of what he'd done. "Then you are lost," Seraphine said quietly. "We will return in 7 days. If the lights still burn and the human still lives, we will make our own choices. Do not say you were not warned." They left in a blur of movement, 4 shapes vanishing up the stairs so fast they barely seemed real. Yaroslav stood alone in the harsh white light, and Dahlia watched his shoulders sag. For a moment he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with sorrow. Then he turned and saw her. "How long have you been there?" His voice was hoarse. "Long enough." Dahlia stepped into the room. "They're going to kill me. No, I will not allow it. Yaroslav, you can't fight your entire court." "I can, I will." She crossed to him, her fear momentarily eclipsed by fury. "You're going to get yourself killed for me. For lights. This is insane." "It is not insane." He reached for her, then stopped himself, his hands clenching. "Dahlia, I have lived 600 years. I have fought wars, ruled courts, watched empires rise and fall, and in all that time, I have never felt—" He stopped, struggling. "You are not just lights to me. You are the reason I wake at dusk. You are the reason this castle feels less like a tomb. I lit the candles because I could not bear the thought of you afraid. But I would burn in sunlight before I let them hurt you. That's not a reason. That's—" Her voice broke. "That's love." Yaroslav went very still. "Yes." Dahlia's world tilted. She'd known on some level, but hearing him say it made it real, made it impossible to ignore. "I can't let you die for me." "Then do not leave." He took her hand, his skin cold against hers. "Stay. Help me face them. We will find a way." "There is no way. They want me gone or dead, and they want you in the dark. We can't give them both." "Then we give them neither. We fight." She looked at their joined hands, at the way his fingers trembled slightly. This creature who was all power and control was shaking because he was afraid not for himself, but for her. "I don't know how. I do not either. But I'm not alone anymore. That is something." Dahlia squeezed his hand, and for the first time since she'd heard the voices, she felt a flicker of hope. 7 days. 7 days, he agreed. We will make them count. They spent the next days planning. Yaroslav explained the politics of vampire courts, the hierarchy, the challenges, the blood laws that governed their kind. He was king, but only as long as he could defend the title. If Seraphine brought enough of the court with her, if she issued a formal challenge, he'd have to fight. And weakened by light, by weeks of sitting in pain, he might lose. "So we make you stronger," Dahlia said. They were in the West Wing's dark room, where Yaroslav had taken to spending time with her, sitting together in the shadows. She'd brought candles just enough to see by, and he'd flinched, but not protested. "You stop sitting in the light. You recover." "No, Yaroslav. If I extinguish the lights, you will be afraid. I will not do that to you." "What if I'm not afraid?" She turned to him, her heart pounding. "What if I've been working on it? I stand in the dark corridor for 10 minutes now. I can turn off my flashlight for a full minute. I'm getting better." "Dahlia, your fear is not something to overcome in a week because I am threatened. That is not healing. That is survival." "Maybe they're the same thing." She reached for his hand in the darkness. "I can't lose you. If the only way to keep you alive is to face my fear, then that's what I'll do. I do not want you to suffer. And I don't want you to die." Her voice rose, sharp with frustration. "You've been suffering for 2 months for me. Let me do this for you, please." Yaroslav pulled her close, his arms careful around her. She could feel the cold of him, the inhuman stillness. "You are the bravest thing I have ever known." "I'm really not. I'm terrified." Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act despite it. Dahlia pressed her face against his chest, listening to the silence where his heartbeat should be. "Will you stay with me? If we turn out the lights, will you stay? I will never leave your side." "Okay." She pulled back, met his dark eyes. "Then let's start small. We'll do it gradually. I need time to adjust, and you need time to heal. 4 days. Can we be ready in 4 days? I do not know, but we will try." They started that night. Yaroslav extinguished half the candles in her tower room. Dahlia sat on the bed, her hands twisted in the blankets, and focused on breathing. The shadows crept closer. Her heart raced, but Yaroslav sat beside her, his presence solid and real, and when the panic threatened to swallow her, she reached for his hand. "I am here," he said quietly. "You are safe. Tell me a story. Distract me." So he told her about the court, about the decades before he'd retreated to the castle. He spoke of alliances and betrayals, of the strange beauty of vampire politics. His voice was low and soothing, and Dahlia clung to it like a lifeline. The darkness was still there, still pressing in, but it was bearable with him beside her. They made it an hour before she broke, gasping, and he immediately relit the candles. But it was a start. The next night, they extinguished more. Dahlia lasted longer, her panic ebbing and flowing in waves. Yaroslav talked her through it, his hand steady in hers, his voice never wavering. He told her about his turning, the agony of transformation, and the strangeness of waking into a new existence. He told her about the first time he saw electric lights and how he'd thought the world had gone mad with brightness. "Do you regret it?" Dahlia asked in the darkness. "Being what you are?" "Sometimes. But if I were mortal, I would never have lived to meet you. So perhaps it was worth it." On the third night, they sat in near total darkness. Only a single candle burned, its flame guttering. Dahlia could barely see Yaroslav, just the faint outline of him in the shadows. Her fear was a living thing, clawing at her lungs, but she focused on his hand in hers, on the sound of his breathing, deliberate and careful, a concession to make her feel less alone. "I'm going to blow out the candle," she said. "You do not have to." "I know, but I want to." She leaned forward and extinguished the flame. The darkness was absolute. Dahlia's breath stopped. She was 7 again, locked in the closet, forgotten and alone. The walls pressed in. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it would tear free. She opened her mouth to scream, "Dahlia!" Yaroslav's voice cut through the panic. "I am here. You are not alone. Feel my hand. I am real. You are safe." She grabbed for him, and he pulled her close, wrapping her in his arms. His cold seeped through her clothes, grounding. "Real." "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "I'm not leaving. Breathe." Dahlia dragged in air, ragged and desperate. Her whole body shook, but Yaroslav held her, steady and unmoving, and slowly, so slowly, the panic ebbed. She focused on the physical, his arms, his shoulder beneath her cheek, the faint scent of old books and stone. The darkness was still there, but he was there too. "How long?" she gasped. 5 minutes. "That's all? That is everything. You are doing beautifully." They sat in the dark for another 5 minutes, then 10. When Dahlia finally asked for light, Yaroslav relit the candle with hands that were shaking. He looked different, less strained, some vitality returning to him. The light had been hurting him so badly, and now he was healing. "One more night," Dahlia said. "Tomorrow we do the whole castle. Are you certain?" "No, but we're out of time." The next day was the longest of Dahlia's life. She spent it in the archives, unable to focus, her mind racing. Tomorrow Seraphine would return. Tomorrow they'd make their choice, fight with Yaroslav weakened, or face the darkness and give him a chance. When dusk came, Yaroslav found her. He looked stronger, his movements sharper. 2 nights of darkness had already made a difference. "We do not have to do this," he said. "I will fight them as I am. And lose." "Perhaps?" Dahlia stood, setting down the manuscript she'd been pretending to read. "I've been thinking about the closet, about why I've been afraid for so long. It wasn't just the dark. It was being alone in it. It was thinking no one was coming. But you're here. You came. And as long as you're with me, I think I can do this." Yaroslav crossed to her and cupped her face in his cold hands. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." "Then let's prove it." They started at the top of the castle, in Dahlia's tower room. She went from candle to candle, extinguishing them one by one. Her hands shook, but she didn't stop. Yaroslav followed, silent and steady. When the room was dark, she reached for him, and they moved to the next room together. It took hours. The castle was vast, and there were so many lights. Dahlia's fear screamed at her to stop, to run, to light everything again. But she focused on Yaroslav's presence, on the knowledge that she wasn't alone. They worked through room after room, floor after floor, until finally they stood in the great hall and extinguished the last lantern. The darkness was complete. The castle, which had blazed for 2 months, went silent and still. Dahlia stood in the center of the hall, trembling, her hand locked in Yaroslav's. The fear was enormous, crushing, but she was still standing, still breathing. "We did it. You did it." His voice was filled with wonder. "Dahlia, you did it." "We did it," she corrected. Then she started to laugh, giddy and breathless. "Oh, God, we actually did it." Yaroslav pulled her close, and she felt him shaking too, not from fear, but from relief. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you." They spent the night in the West Wing's dark room, holding each other. Dahlia's fear ebbed and flowed, but it was manageable with him there. And Yaroslav, he seemed to unfold, to relax into the darkness like a plant turning toward sun. She realized how much pain he'd been in, how much he'd hidden for her sake. "Tomorrow they come," she said quietly. "Yes." "Will you win?" "I will not lose you. That is all that matters." Dahlia tilted her face up, finding his in the darkness. "I love you. I should have said it days ago, but I was afraid. Not of you, of this, of how impossible it is, but I don't care anymore. I love you." She heard his breath catch. Then his lips found hers, cold and careful, and he kissed her like she was something precious, something worth burning for. When he pulled back, his voice was rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the moment you stood in my doorway and thanked me for the lights. I will love you until the world ends, and if they come for you tomorrow, they will have to tear me apart first. Let's make sure it doesn't come to that." They held each other in the darkness, and Dahlia thought about the girl she'd been 2 months ago, alone, afraid, organizing her life around avoiding the thing that terrified her. She'd been so small, so manageable. But love had a way of making you larger, braver. Love had lit 10,000 lights and then taught her she didn't need them. As long as she had Yaroslav, the dark was just the absence of light, not a monster, not a tomb, just night. And night could be beautiful. Seraphine arrived at dusk with a dozen others. They swept into the castle like a storm, their pale faces twisted with fury. But when they entered the great hall and found it dark, truly dark, the way it should be, they stopped. Yaroslav stood at the center of the hall, Dahlia at his side. He'd dressed for court, all black with silver at his throat, and he looked every inch the king. Powerful, ancient, unafraid. And Dahlia, wearing a dress she'd found in the castle's closets, stood with her head high despite the terror singing through her veins. "You extinguished the lights," Seraphine said slowly. "The human allowed it?" "I chose it," Dahlia said, her voice steady, "because he needed it." "And you are not afraid?" "I'm terrified, but I'm here anyway." Something flickered across Seraphine's face, surprise perhaps, or reluctant respect. She turned to Yaroslav. "She is more than we thought." "She is everything," Yaroslav said simply. "And she stays. The court will not accept it. A human in a vampire king's home, the court will accept what I tell it to accept." Yaroslav's voice went cold, commanding. "I am not diminished. I am not weakened. I am stronger than I have been in decades because I have something to protect. If you doubt that, issue your challenge. I will meet it." Seraphine studied him, and Dahlia could see the calculation in her eyes. She was weighing the odds, deciding if a fight was worth it. Finally, she inclined her head, a fraction of an inch. "Perhaps we were hasty. Perhaps there is value in unconventional arrangements. But the court will watch, Yaroslav, and if you falter, we will return. Then watch. You will be disappointed." They left, and the silence they left behind was immense. Dahlia's knees nearly gave out. Yaroslav caught her, held her steady. "It is done," he said quietly. "They will not return." "How do you know?" "Because you stood in the dark with me. Because you were afraid, and you did it anyway. That is the kind of strength they respect. They came expecting to find me weak, and instead they found us unbreakable." Dahlia started to laugh, slightly hysterical. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it." He pulled her close, and she felt his relief in the way he held her tight enough to bruise, desperate. "You faced your fear for me. How can I ever thank you?" "Stay with me. That's all I want. I will stay with you until you tell me to leave, and even then I will not go far." They stood in the dark hall, holding each other, and Dahlia felt something shift inside her. The fear wasn't gone. It would probably never be gone completely, but it was smaller now, manageable, because she'd learned that darkness wasn't empty. Yaroslav was in it. Love was in it. And that was enough to make it bearable. Over the following weeks, they found their balance. Dahlia kept working on the archives, but now Yaroslav worked beside her. They lit candles when she needed them, let the darkness settle when she could bear it. Some nights were harder than others. Some nights the old terror rose and she needed the castle blazing again. And Yaroslav never complained, never made her feel weak. He simply lit the lights and sat with her until she felt safe. "I do not want you to force yourself," he said one night when she'd asked him to extinguish the candles in her room. "Your healing is not linear. There will be setbacks." "I know, but I also know I'm getting better. The dark doesn't feel like dying anymore. It just feels like night." "That is what it should be." Dahlia curled against him, feeling his cold seep into her warmth. "Tell me something. If I'd never gotten better, if I'd needed the lights forever, would you have regretted it? Choosing me?" "Never. Not even a little." He pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "Dahlia, I have lived 600 years. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've known power and wealth and all the pleasures immortality can offer. And in all that time, I have never been as happy as I am right now, holding you in the dark. That is worth any amount of light, any amount of pain." She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. Gratitude and love and wonder that this impossible creature had chosen her. That he'd lit his world on fire for her and then stood beside her as she learned she didn't need it. "I want to stay," she said when they broke apart. "Not just to finish the collection. I want to stay with you. Is that can I?" "You are asking if you may stay in your own home?" Yaroslav's smile was small, private. "Dahlia, this castle has been yours since the moment you arrived. I am simply grateful to share it. I'm mortal. I'll grow old. I'll die." "I know. And you're okay with that?" "I'm not okay with losing you. But I am okay with loving you for as long as I can. That's enough." Dahlia thought about that. About the years stretching ahead, finite and precious. About growing older while he stayed frozen. It should have been sad. But instead, it felt like a gift to be loved so completely, with full knowledge of its end. "There are ways," she said carefully. "Aren't there? For humans to become what you are?" Yaroslav went very still. "Yes." "Would you if I asked?" "Dahlia, that is not a question to answer lightly. Becoming a vampire is death and rebirth. It is pain. It is giving up sunlight, food, everything you know. I will not take that choice from you, but I will not encourage it either. You should live your mortal life. You should experience the world as you were meant to. What if I experience it and still choose you? Then I will be waiting, however long it takes." She let it rest there, but the knowledge sat warm in her chest. She had options, she had time, and she had a vampire king who loved her enough to let her choose. The months passed. Spring became summer, and Dahlia finished the initial cataloging of the collection. But there was always more work, more to discover, and she made no moves to leave. The castle became her home in truth. She learned its rhythms, its secrets. She befriended the few staff who came during the day to maintain the kitchens and grounds, and they accepted her presence with the quiet efficiency of people who'd seen stranger things. Yaroslav taught her about his world, the politics, the histories, the strange etiquette of vampire society. She met a few others of his kind, carefully vetted, and learned that not all vampires were like Seraphine. Some were scholars, artists, scientists. Some had been alive so long they'd become strange and fey, disconnected from human concerns. But they all treated Yaroslav with respect, and by extension, they treated Dahlia with cautious courtesy. "You have changed things," one of them told her, an ancient creature named Lucian who looked barely 20. "He was withdrawing from us before you came, becoming more remote. But now he engages again, speaks at court. You brought him back." "He brought himself back," Dahlia said. "I just gave him a reason. That is more than anyone else has done in a century." She learned the shape of her new life, learned to anticipate Yaroslav's needs, his moods. He was not always easy. 600 years of existence had left him with habits and opinions that were sometimes strange, but he was patient with her mortality, her human quirks. When she got sick with the flu, he hovered like an anxious mother hen, bringing her soup and medicine and fretting in a way that would have been funny if she'd felt well enough to laugh. "I am not good at this," he admitted, sitting beside her bed. "I do not remember how to care for illness." "You're doing fine," Dahlia said, her voice raspy. "Just stay with me. Always." And he did. Through the illness, through the bad nights when her fear resurged, through the moments of doubt when she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake, he stayed, steady and constant, and Dahlia learned what it meant to be truly loved. A year after she arrived, Dahlia made her choice. They were in the West Wing's dark room, where they spent most evenings now. Dahlia had progressed to the point where she could sit in complete darkness for hours, as long as Yaroslav was with her. The fear was still there, a quiet hum beneath her thoughts, but it no longer controlled her. "I want to be turned," she said into the darkness. Yaroslav didn't answer immediately. She felt him go tense beside her. "Are you certain?" "Yes." "Dahlia, you should take more time. You should be sure." "I am sure." She turned to face him, wishing she could see his expression. "I've had a year to think about it. I've lived as a human in this world, and I've learned what I want. I want you. I want centuries, not decades. I want to stand beside you without the clock ticking down. I want this, Yaroslav. I'm ready. It will hurt. I know. You will die. Truly die. And what wakes will be you, but also not you. Changed. I trust you to bring me back." His hand found hers in the darkness, gripped tight. "If I do this, if you are sure, I will love you through every moment of it. But Dahlia, please, take one more day, be certain." "I've taken 365 days. The answer is still yes." He pulled her close, and she felt him shaking. "You humble me. You terrify me. I do not know if I am strong enough to do this right." "You are, and I'll be with you." "Always?" "Always." The turning was agony. Yaroslav had warned her, but nothing could have prepared Dahlia for the reality. It started with his bite, sharp and cold, his fangs sinking into her throat. The venom followed, burning through her veins like liquid fire. She tried to scream, but her throat had closed, her body convulsed, every nerve ending lit up in pain. And through it all, Yaroslav held her. He'd moved them to her tower room, surrounded by candles at her request. He held her as the venom spread, as her heart began to slow. He whispered to her in languages she didn't understand, old words that sounded like prayers. When she begged him to stop, to make it end, he pressed his forehead to hers and said, "I am here. You are not alone. Stay with me." The dying took 3 days. Dahlia drifted in and out of consciousness, her body shutting down piece by piece. She felt her heart stutter, felt her lungs cease their rhythm. The world went gray, then dark. And in the dark, she heard Yaroslav's voice calling her back. "Dahlia, stay with me. Do not go where I cannot follow." She wanted to answer, but she had no breath, no voice. She was dissolving, becoming nothing, and the terror of it was worse than anything she'd ever known. But Yaroslav's hand was in hers, real, solid, an anchor. She held on. When she woke, the world was different. Everything was sharper. She could hear the flutter of moth wings outside the window, could smell the wax cooling in the candles. The colors were more vivid, the textures overwhelming. And Yaroslav, he was incandescent. She could see the faint glow of his presence, could sense the power coiled in him like a sleeping beast. "Dahlia?" His voice was careful, wary. "Can you hear me?" She tried to speak, and what came out was a rasp. Her throat was raw, painful. Yaroslav lifted her, pressed a cup to her lips, blood, warm and rich. She drank without thinking, and the pain receded. "How do you feel?" Dahlia took stock. Her body felt strong, invincible. The fear, her old companion, the terror that had lived in her bones was muted, distant. She could feel it, but it no longer controlled her. Different, better, like I can do anything. "You can." He set down the cup and cupped her face, searching her eyes. "You are still you, I can see you, but you are also one of you. Yes, Dahlia tested her limbs, her new strength. She stood, and the movement was effortless, graceful in a way she'd never been. She crossed to the window and looked out at the night. It was breathtaking. The mountains glowed silver under the moon, the stars sharp as cut glass. She'd never seen anything so beautiful. "The dark doesn't scare me anymore," she said wonderingly. "I can feel the fear, but it's like it belongs to someone else, someone I used to be. The turning changes some things, mutes mortal terrors. But you are still you, Dahlia. Your mind, your heart, those are unchanged." She turned to him, and for the first time she really saw him, not as a human would, but as he was ancient and powerful and utterly devoted. She crossed to him and took his face in her hands. "Thank you." "For what?" "For lighting the candles, for sitting in the dark, for loving me enough to let me choose, for all of it." Yaroslav closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I would do it all again. 1,000 times." They stood together in the candlelit room, vampire and newborn vampire, and Dahlia felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was where she belonged, in the dark with him, no longer afraid. Learning to be a vampire was both easier and harder than Dahlia expected. The physical aspects came naturally, the strength, the speed, the heightened senses. Yaroslav taught her to hunt, to feed without killing, to move through the world with her new power contained. But the mental adjustment took time. She grieved her mortality sometimes, in unexpected moments. The taste of food, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, those were gone forever. But she had centuries now. She had Yaroslav. And slowly, she learned to see her new existence not as a loss, but as a transformation. Yaroslav was patient with her stumbles, her questions. He taught her the rules of vampire society, the politics she'd need to navigate. And when the court demanded to meet her, the human who'd become their king's consort, he stood beside her with fierce pride. "They will test you," he warned before her first formal appearance. "They will try to find weakness. Do not let them." "What if I fail?" "You will not. You are stronger than you know." The court convened in a hall beneath the castle, a vast chamber carved from living rock. Hundreds of vampires filled it, their pale faces gleaming in the low light. Dahlia stood at Yaroslav's side, wearing a gown of deep blue that he'd commissioned, and tried not to feel like an imposter. Seraphine was there, of course. She studied Dahlia with cold appraisal. The human chose transformation. Interesting. "I chose love," Dahlia said evenly. "The transformation was simply a consequence." "Love," Seraphine said the word like it was foreign. "How mortal." "I am not mortal anymore." "No, you are untested, unproven. Why should the court accept you?" "Because she is mine," Yaroslav said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Because I have chosen her, and my word is law here. But if you require proof," he turned to Dahlia, "show them." Dahlia understood. She reached for her power. The new strength coiled inside her and let it unfurl. The air went cold. Frost spread across the floor in intricate patterns. Every vampire in the hall felt the pressure of her presence, young and raw, but undeniably powerful. When she pulled it back, the silence was absolute. "She has inherited strength," Yaroslav said quietly. "She will be formidable in time, and she is under my protection. Does anyone challenge that?" No one spoke. "Then we are finished here." They left the hall together, and Dahlia felt the weight of 100 stairs following them, but Yaroslav's hand was steady in hers, and she drew strength from it. "Did I do okay?" "You were magnificent. They still don't trust me. They will, in time. For now it is enough that they respect you." Dahlia learned to navigate the court, to play the political games required of a king's consort. But her favorite moments were still the quiet ones, evenings in the archives, now working side by side with Yaroslav on the collection. Nights in the West Wing's dark room, where they could simply exist together without performance. "Do you miss the lights?" Yaroslav asked one night. Dahlia considered. The castle was mostly dark now, with candles lit only in the rooms they frequented. She'd grown comfortable in the shadows, learned to love the soft darkness that was their world. "Sometimes, but I also love this, the quiet, the way the dark feels like peace instead of fear. I am glad. Do you miss the way things were, before I came?" "No." He pulled her close, his chin resting on her head. "I was existing before you. Now I am living. There is a difference. They made a life together in the castle. Dahlia continued her work in the archives, and Yaroslav resumed his duties as king, attending court and mediating disputes. They traveled sometimes, visiting other vampire enclaves, seeing the world through her new eyes. Dahlia learned that immortality was both gift and burden. There was so much time, but also the weight of watching the world change around you. But she had Yaroslav, and that made everything bearable. One evening, 2 years after her turning, Dahlia stood in her old tower room and lit every candle she could find. She worked methodically until the space blazed with light, bright as the day she'd first arrived. Then she found Yaroslav in his study and took his hand. "Come with me." He followed, curious, and stopped when he saw the room. "Dahlia, what—" "I wanted to remember," she said softly, "how it was, when you lit the castle for me, when you sat in pain so I could feel safe." She turned to him and her eyes were bright. "You gave me the world, Yaroslav. You gave me light when I needed it, and then you gave me the courage to embrace the dark. And I wanted to say thank you, properly. You have thanked me 1,000 times. I know, but this felt important, to remember where we started." Yaroslav looked around the blazing room, and something in his expression softened. "The lights were easy. You were worth burning for. And you were worth facing my fear for." They stood together in the light, and Dahlia felt the circle close. She'd come to this castle broken and afraid, and Yaroslav had met her where she was. He'd lit 10,000 lights without being asked, without expecting anything in return. He'd simply seen her fear and could not bear it. And in loving him, she'd learned that fear was not something to hide from. It was something to walk through, hand in hand with someone who would never let you fall. "I love you," she said, "for the lights, for the dark, for all of it." "I love you," he answered, "for your courage, your strength, your choice to stay." They extinguished the candles together, slowly and deliberately, until only a handful remained. The room settled into soft shadow, comfortable and warm. And in that gentle darkness, they held each other, two people who had found their way through fear and pain to something true. Dahlia had been terrified of the dark, and so the Vampire King had filled his castle with 10,000 lights. But in the end, she had learned that she didn't need them. She had him, and that was more than enough. The castle stood on the mountain, dark and quiet and peaceful. Inside, a vampire king and his consort lived their immortal lives, navigating the balance between shadow and light. They faced challenges, court politics, the passing of time, the strangeness of forever. But they faced them together. And in the West Wing's dark room, where they spent their evenings, there were no candles at all. Just two people who had learned that darkness was only frightening if you were alone in it. Dahlia was not alone. She would never be alone again. And in that certainty, she found something she'd been searching for all her life: peace. The story had come full circle. The girl who couldn't bear the dark had become a creature of shadow. The vampire who'd burned his home for her had taught her that love was sacrifice, freely given. And together, they'd built something that would last centuries. Not because it was easy, not because it was simple, but because they'd both chosen it over and over every night. That was the real gift. Not the lights, not the transformation, but the choice to keep choosing each other through fear and pain and all the long years ahead. Dahlia Sinclair had come to the castle seeking a job. She'd found a home, a purpose, a love that would outlast empires. And Yaroslav Penhallow, who had spent 600 years alone, had finally found someone worth emerging from the shadows for. They lived in the castle, in the darkness they'd both learned to love, and they were happy. Truly, impossibly happy. The lights had done their job. They'd brought Dahlia safely through her fear to the other side. And now they rested, candles and lanterns stored away, waiting for the rare moments when a flicker of old terror returned and needed to be gently soothed. But most nights, the castle was dark, and in that darkness, two vampires built there forever, one peaceful evening at a time. The end had become a beginning. The fear had become courage. And the impossible love between a mortal girl and a vampire king had become a story that would be told for centuries, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones that cost us everything we are and give us everything we could become. Dahlia stood at the castle window one night, looking out at the stars, and thought about the girl she'd been, afraid, alone, organizing her entire existence around avoiding what terrified her. She was grateful to that girl, grateful for her courage in taking the job, in walking into the unknown, because that scared girl had led her here, to this moment, to this life. "What are you thinking?" Yaroslav asked, joining her at the window. That I'm glad I was afraid." He raised an eyebrow. "Truly?" "Yes. Because if I hadn't been, you wouldn't have lit the candles, and I wouldn't have known what it meant to be loved like that. Completely. Without reservation. You saw my fear and you didn't try to fix me. You just made space for it, made it safe for me to exist as I was." She leaned into him. "That changed everything." "You changed everything," Yaroslav said softly. "I was half alive before you came, going through the motions, and then you arrived with your fear and your courage and your beautiful mind, and suddenly I had a reason to exist beyond simple survival. We saved each other then. Yes, I believe we did." They stood together, watching the night, and Dahlia felt the rightness of it all the way down to her bones. This was where she belonged. In the dark, with him, no longer afraid. The castle had burned with 10,000 lights, but the greatest light had been the one they'd kindled together, the steady, enduring flame of a love that could survive anything. Even darkness, even fear, even the impossible gulf between mortal and immortal. They had survived. They had thrived. And they would continue, night after night, century after century, choosing each other over and over until the world itself grew dark. And that, Dahlia thought, was the best kind of forever.